Morning, everyone. This is Vicki Harrell, Executive Director of SWPP, and welcome to our webinar today, sponsored by Intradiem. We're going to learn a little bit how WFM leaders are orchestrating the AI-powered contact center, and we're excited to have Derek Eck and Jim Simmons with us today presenting. They're going to be giving us a lot of great information today, but they're going to be asking for your input as well. So when they ask you a question, we want you to put it in the chat on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. There should be a chat bubble. And if you would click on that chat bubble now, and let's let everybody know that we know where that chat is. So if you'll chat in, how many agents do you have in your organization today? So let's put that in the chat just so that we know that everybody can find the chat this morning and be ready to interact with the panelists. All right, here we go. Looks like everybody is getting their numbers in. We've got some low numbers and some really high numbers in out there. So we're going from 55 to 5,000. So, right. Right. Hope everybody has found the chat. And we've still got more 2,500 plus and 5,000 plus and another 150. Right. So you guys are a wide range of sizes this morning. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Derek to get started. Derek, welcome, and we're excited to have you and Jim with us today.
Thanks, Vicki. So as Vicki said, my name is Derek Eck. I am with Intradiem. I am Intradiem's Chief Experience Officer, and I'm glad to be here with everyone this morning. So good morning. My role at Intradiem, as I said, I'm Chief Experience Officer. All that really means is I have the privilege of leading a great group of people that is focused on Intradiem's promises and working back with our customers to make sure that we're achieving our value and delivering a best-in-class customer experience. I'm here today with Jim Simmons, who is one of our prior customers, who's worked with us for a very long time and is an industry leader in the workforce management space and a great voice. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jim to further introduce himself and go ahead and get us kicked off. Jim?
All right. Pardon me. Great. Thank you, Derek. Jim Simmons, as Derek mentioned, I've spent my fair share of time in the industry, going on 28 years now, and enjoyed it. I've done a variety of roles, so I've had the good fortune of really looking at contact centers from multiple angles. I've been on the phones as an agent. I've done forecasting, everything in WFM. I've been in marketing. So I feel very fortunate to have that scope and view of what the contact center is and does. We're going to talk a little bit today, or actually a lot, about the impacts of AI, and specifically with this group about workforce management and automation. So if we could go to the next slide. And I want to start out with a little bit about the customer service complexity. And anybody who's been in the industry for more than a year at this point, and even if you've been in only a year, you recognize that it is really changing. And over the 28 years I've been in the business, it's definitely changed and certainly become much more complex. And one of the things that I've noticed and talked with a lot of folks about over the past, say, 2 or 3 years is the changing role of workforce management. And that's one of the things that I think is really great about what Vicki and the SWPP team are doing and Intradiem are looking at is workforce management historically has taken a bit of a backseat, right? Their role has primarily been how do you make sure that we have enough headcount to meet the incoming demand. But we really see a shift in that. And I don't think it's any accident that this particular graphic has workforce management in the center of where we operate, right? And if you think about it, WFM is really that sort of Venn diagram. Historically, it's been between the operations world and finance, where they overlap. We bring workforce management in and make sure we manage that headcount. We hit those financial numbers in terms of handle time and occupancy and shrinkage and all of those things. But the reality is, especially in today's environment, we're overlapped with tech, we're overlapped with L&D, and certainly the agents and the customers. And that's what you see on this slide. We think about everything that's going on, not only within WFM, but for operations, right? Certainly over the past few years, thinking post-pandemic, the remote workforce has become a much bigger part of what we've done. And some companies are shifting back, and that's a WFM concern, right? How do we manage that and deal with that? Obviously, the agents are feeling the impact of that. And it's become a much more rapid environment, right? As we facilitate quicker access to information and data, the agents have to react much more quickly. And obviously, the customers are feeling the impact of what we're doing, as well as what the tech industry and AI and things of that nature are doing as well. What I think is important, and as we go through today's conversation, is to think about the big connection between the customer experience and the agent experience, and WFM's responsibility in helping manage those two things. And I speak to that. Most folks know this inherently, but there was a poll, a 2024 Gartner survey, 74% of high tech organizations, it's not just tech organizations, but it's organizations using the latest and greatest technology, they have demonstrated the link between the customer experience and the employee or agent experience. And as a matter of fact, of those, I think it's every one of them, 100% had that ranked within the top three. So that's really important, especially for us as we think about where our role exists and what we're doing. As workforce management professionals, we have to understand that we're not only impacting the business and the agents, but inherently that's really impacting the customer as well. So I know we've got chat open. Everybody's responded to Vicky's question. We're going to kind of kick things off and ask for you to respond in chat. And one of the things that we'll be leading into as part of this complexity is discussion about AI. So our question is your organization currently using AI? So if you'll go ahead and just a quick yes or no. We have a couple additional questions coming up. All right. All right. I see a lot of yeses, a couple no's in there. All right. Okay. Exploring, but nothing in production. All right. We are, but it's very new. Yeah. Which makes it a little bit treacherous, right? So Melissa, if we want to go to the next slide while we, these last final few responses pop in here. All right. So we bring this slide up, not necessarily to scare people, right? So if we think of everybody who responded yes, I don't want all of you to go, am I in that 80% or am I in that 20%? What we think is important about this slide and why we bring this to the attention of the audience is that, like I said, it's a treacherous path and there are a lot of things that can go wrong. Anybody who's been around long enough, and I put myself in that category, remembers a lot of technology changes, right? When I first started in the contact centers, IVRs were kind of newer, right? So that was a big deal. And I remember when we started providing online, just websites, not even chat or anything. So I've seen how when a new technology is out there, it's common within the industry for everybody to try to play a part and take advantage of that and certainly make that a differentiator. But there are a lot of pitfalls, and some of these are listed here. Certainly misunderstanding and miscommunication. I think that one's at the top, and with good reason. As we talk about AI from an operational definition, it's very broad right now. And not all of us are experts. As a matter of fact, I would argue there's probably very few real experts around the space. And then when you break it down into specific companies, some folks haven't even organized around AI yet. So it's really important to understand that as you and your company look at AI as a potential solution, however and wherever you would look to implement it, that the current failure rate is very high. And how do you bring yourself into that 20%? And our goal and what we would like to see is, how do we decrease that number? How does Intradiem, working with other organizations, help them understand and implement AI in a way that's meaningful, impactful, but maybe a little bit less problematic, and lowering that 80% to something much lower than that current number?
Yeah, Jim, the only thing I would add here is if you look at kind of the common trends you see with this and thinking about AI as what it's intended, a lot of companies, especially those that we talk to from a customer base perspective, a lot of these initiatives are typically ran through your technology teams. And technology teams are very intentional about how they approach change. They approach it from a Scrum perspective, or very technical change approaches that they're used to from a very structural way. And the reality is, with change, when it involves people, people are very complex and very emotional about change. And so when you think about why these things are failing and the bullets you see here, a lot of times it's because of that approach and the fact of that misunderstanding, the miscommunication, those things, and the people side is missing from that change. We at Intradiem work very closely with our customers and really talk a lot about the reinforcement of change management as it relates to the people side. And you'll hear a lot about that as we talk today, about kind of weaving in change management from a people perspective and not just a technical perspective, to try to start to make some of this successful. So it's just something to kind of think about as you look at this slide and what's caused this 80% of these to fail, and really kind of analyzing these 5 bullets, being that it's very technical driven from this perspective.
That's an excellent point, and I would layer onto that as well, as again, it's speaking to the WFM industry as a whole. Going back to that first slide we talked about, our central point within the operations world really puts a lot of pressure on us. If you think about it, I'm sure most of you folks with larger organizations are familiar that most of the WFM software providers are now bringing AI to the forefront. So they're adding to that to their product, and you as end users have to learn how to use that. If your organization is implementing some sort of AI project, you have to know how that's going to impact. It could be bots or things of that nature. So we're kind of at the center as WFM professionals to not only learn it for ourselves, but understand what dominoes are out there that may come and knock on our door at some point. And I think that's the first time anybody's ever used that sort of analogy, dominoes knocking on your door. So we have a couple of questions we're going to ask on the prior slide. So those of you that answered yes to the first question, is your company implementing AI? What types of customer service AI projects are you doing? So in a sentence or so, if you can, is it agent assistance? Is it customer facing? Is it something to do with forecasting and staff planning? Okay. I want pizza. I love it. Okay, email bots, chat bots, yep. Agent assist, okay, note taking. AI wrap, okay. Automation, note taking. Seen a lot of that, yeah, and we've heard. And I think it's a great initial play for sure. Okay. Agent bots, all right. So I'm going to ask those folks who've been so kind as to respond. Really great answers. I'm seeing, again, a lot of what we've heard before, so it's reinforcing what we're seeing in the industry. So if you think about those projects and what your current take on those is, would you say they're going well or not so well? So I know there was a lot out there around summarization. So well and Okay, not especially productive, still piloting, fairly well. All right, 50-50. Okay, delay in delivery. So I would say that, Derek, to me, it seems middle of the road, right? Some
Yeah,
folks are saying
mixed.
I'm seeing it, some folks are not, and there seems to be quite a bit of we're still trying to figure it out. Is that your general sense as well?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple going well, and then a couple, but mostly to your point, it's fairly mixed with kind of right in the middle, with some still trying to figure it out. To your point, to your earlier point, that what they're trying to solve is spot on to what we're hearing. It's a lot of that lane of trying to assist the agent versus replace the agent, which is exactly where we're seeing the focus right now, which gets into the complexity side of things and helping the agent out, and really helping with that adaption and the adoption of what is being left behind.
Right. And I don't know that this is the case for anybody who said it's not going well, but I've definitely seen a division within the industry whereby maybe a little, again, folks want to get into the game sooner rather than later. And, to this particular slide, maybe not being quite clear on what the benefits are or what some of the hurdles are and getting it implemented. So what we've heard from those who tend to have success, and again, I don't know if this is true of those that are on this call, but ultimately having a very clear, and I would say oversimplified structure and output, right? We know what our numbers should be. We know what we're going at. And what I've seen a lot of is folks aren't, it's easy to look at AI and take that big swing and try to make that home run. But really, the companies that seem to be succeeding, to use that sport analogy, is they're looking for a single, right? Let's just get on base with this. Let's get it out there, get somebody and let's, worry about the home run a little bit later. So Melissa, if we could move to the next slide. I want to think about, and we've seen a lot, I would say more than 50% of the ones that came in seem to be related to agent benefits, which again, I think is great because agents really need the support. But I'm not sure that every company that's trying to implement for the agent is really thinking about the complexity that exists. And so, how do we really support the agents in a way that's as seamless as possible? I'll give an example is, I've seen a lot of folks talk about how do you provide additional support during the call for the agent, which is great. And I think any agent would tell you, yeah, it would be great to have information at my fingertips. However, if it's not implemented very well and it's pop-ups and it's all sorts of things talking at you all at once, it's just going to make life that much more difficult for the agent. The other thing I think is important as we look at the industry is that there's been a lot of discussion around AI impacting agent jobs, which I'm not saying isn't true. I don't know that it's going to take all of them away as people have predicted, but what we will have left are agents that are going to require more training, more skill. Really, what we will end up with is agents that are effective at interacting with AI, understanding how to use it, and benefiting from it are really going to be the cream of the crop. So we, as contact center professionals, are really going to have to take that into account, right? You're going to have a higher level, and hopefully, again, we're driving that agent experience so that that's translating into a better customer experience through implementation of AI projects. Derek, anything you'd add to this slide?
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think the other part to it is kind of hitting on what you exactly said. When I talk to a lot of the executives at the customers we work with on the note of that complexity piece and not necessarily replacing the agents, but expanding what they do. When you think about agents, that term is evolving into more of just a structured worker or productive worker, depending on the customer we're talking to. And what that really means is the work they're doing is changing. It's not just inbound calls anymore. They're having to think about as AI comes into their centers, and that true contact center word is becoming more about contacts, meaning it's not just about calls, it's about back office, it's about chat bots, it's about email campaigns, it's about true offline work, it's about claims, it's about all these types of work that maybe prior to AI, it was really hard to figure out how to get one worker to really be able to work all these type of things. But now because of AI, they've been really able to start to think about, how do I really get all this work to one user, one worker, and then ultimately, how do I train them more effectively, or not have to train them on everything, but feed them the information they need to be able to do the work effectively and still protect the customer experience while not burning that worker out. So those are kind of the high stake games that are being played now, and conversations that are having to take place, and really the new world that we're starting to enter as we think about these complexities and conversations. So to your point, reduced call volume doesn't mean reduce workload. It just means new type of work, because you're bringing in all types of mixes in that conversation that maybe didn't get to exist before without AI.
And the last point I would add on this slide is, with all of those things that you just talked about, and going back to the fact that this is largely a group of WFM professionals, our job, our task for the business is to make sure that the agents are in a space and a place to be as productive as possible. But that's a very fine line, right? How do you make sure that someone is trained and well enough to be effective and efficient as possible without wearing them out, burning them out? And that's all part of a coordinated effort between coaches and HR and learning and development. But like I said at the outset of this, WFM sits at the middle of that. When someone needs to coach, who are they talking to? When someone needs to change shifts, who are they talking to? So it's really important for us as WFM professionals to understand how much responsibility sits in our wheelhouse. So I think we're ready for the next slide, Derek.
Yeah, so we've been alluding to this, but there's this really fine balance that you now have to play in this new world that you're entering, between EX and CX. And the CX is really focusing on this game of efficiencies and the customer experience, those things that we've always historically from a workforce management focused on, like the handle time and the service levels and all the things that we've known that have mattered to our customer in the end, that have led to higher CSATs and higher NPS, and the penalties we try to avoid depending on the industry that you're in. Those things still matter today and aren't going to change. But as we've been talking about, the complexity that automation and AI is going to create in your workplace is going to continue to get more and more difficult. And the employee experience is going to become more and more an important part of that equation if you're going to avoid attrition, and get ahead of that attrition. We all remember the days of COVID and the really high attrition we experienced at the peak of that, coming off of it. And many contact centers probably have normalized to some degree for the most part, but the goal is to avoid getting back there. If we're not careful, we could see those numbers reach those peaks again as AI starts to really creep back in if we don't really treat this balance right. So really, automation implementation, there's a good intent behind it when you're approaching this, but as I alluded to before, a lot of the teams that are behind these implementations tend to approach this from a technical implementation. It is the job of the operations team or workforce management teams that are involved in the day-to-day to remember there's a people side tied to this, and really kind of go in and say, okay, what's the consequence of this change? How do we really make sure that we're balancing out the employee side And how do we design this change around the tasks that we're trying to handle and get that balance between the employee experience we're trying to get, as well as also the customer experience. And the easiest way to summarize that, Jim alluded to it earlier, um, talking about the why. Why are we doing the change? But then you expand it even further and go into what's in it for the employee? What are they getting out of this? And we've talked about it a little bit, which is ultimately, with all these complexities coming in, by helping them through this change and some of these AI capabilities that are coming in, some of you mentioned in there note summaries that you're going to be able to do to help them with their handle time. Obviously, the core benefit there is it's making their handle times faster. And as that technology gets better and better, it's only going to make that work easier for them, which is going to allow them to get to the next call, which hopefully is going to reduce occupancy over time and create more breaks between calls. Yes, that's going to get filled with other things, but there's ways that you balance that off. And then remembering at the end of the day that with the people side that goes with this, there's got to be the balance of what you give them in return to this. We believe at Intradiem, when we're implementing things, there's got to be a trade-off. So if you're implementing things that are about driving efficiencies, you've got to give them something in return from an engagement side of it too, so that you're empowering them to want to adopt the change. And that is part of that right balance that you're striking. So you're giving the employee experience win while you're giving the customer experience win. So it's a really fine balance that you're walking here. It's a very tight rope you're having to walk here. But the goal is, as you're striking this balance, the idea is you've got to maintain that very tight rope between employee experience and customer experience as you navigate this new world of AI and automation, in order to protect the burnout that's going to ultimately lead to attrition that you could easily see as high as the COVID times again if you're not careful. Next slide, please. So what does all that mean? For us, there's really critical success factors for AI execution. It can really be simply laid down into a couple things. So for success to be achieved within a center, when you're rolling out any sort of automation or AI in general, it really comes down to, does that change align to your organizational goals? It's got to have a tie back to that. If it doesn't, it's not going to make sense. You're not going to get the buy-in. You're not going to be able to explain the why that Jim alluded to earlier, which means people aren't going to buy why you're doing it. Secondly, the voice of the agent has to be heard through this change. And not just the agent, by the way, also the leaders that are impacted by this change. You've got to make sure you have those feedback loops to constantly hear how the change is going, not just once the change is implemented, but also as you're building the change to be deployed. You got to have voices in that process. You've got to have champions that you're getting ready for the change. You have to have your advocates to go out there and be the champion and the voice for you to convince people to adopt this change. Because the reality is that not everyone's going to be on board right out of the gate. The people that they're going to believe the most are their peers, not always the leader or workforce management. A lot of times they believe we're just doing it for other reasons besides the reason that we say we're doing it. But when it's their peer telling them to adopt it, they tend to believe them more sincerely. Additionally, you've got to be able to adapt real time. I think workforce management, more than any other team, knows this. Nothing ever goes according to plan. We all go in with our best intent with plans, and the plan never seems to happen the way we intend it to. Just like change and forecasts, they are exactly the same. You go in and it just doesn't react the same way. And change is fickle because people are involved. So you have to be able to adapt to it, and really come back and kind of reassess what worked, what didn't work, and really kind of reshape what you need to do based on what you're hearing from the teams and what you're seeing happen from a results perspective. And I think one of the most important parts of this, besides all the things we talked about, which the reason and the biggest reason why change isn't successful and what's going to help make your change ultimately successful is leadership commitment. You've got to have visible leadership commitment throughout the change, from the very beginning, explaining the why, all the way through the end, through reinforcing the change itself. And that's not just workforce management. That's not just the supervisor, by the way. That is everyone all the way up to the most senior leader in those areas that you're implementing the change from a workforce management perspective or an operations perspective. So when you think about AI and as you're implementing it, you need the support from a complete leadership perspective to get that buy-in and then to stay visible throughout. If you have that, you're going to get the reinforcement you need from beginning to end to get the agents and their leadership too to buy in. Because if the agents don't see their leaders are buying in at every level, we all know what happens. You guys have implemented change at various levels throughout all your careers, based on the various tenure we probably have here, whether it's a process change, a attendance policy change, whatever it may be. It just doesn't stick if you don't have the support of the leadership team. Next slide, please. So why is all this important? We've been talking about this and we've been alluding to it. The biggest barrier to sustainable change and execution ultimately ends up being burnout. And the reality behind this is that when you think about AI, and Jim was alluding to this earlier within the complexity conversation, and that is that as you implement all these changes and as you implement all this this new technology that's coming into your contact centers with AI and automation, and the processes that then have to support those things, it's going to inevitably make the job of the agent, or as you know, you're going to see in the future, just the general worker, harder. What comes with that, if you're not careful, is that burnout that we were alluding to earlier. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what that means is you have to be able to identify those things early if you're going to avoid those trends that I was talking about earlier that we've seen in the past that's caused high numbers of attrition to our businesses. You've already kind of, if you think about the manager today, the manager today is already manually chasing down all the indications of burnout that they see, whether it's the early warning signs that there's trying to look at from a handle time perspective, or all these factors. And the reality is that there's probably no consistency. We hear this throughout. Jim and I had this had a presentation about a month ago where we talked to a group of people, and there was a very common feedback in the room that there was a lack of consistency of how they were, how leaders were doing this. And I hear this with our executive leaders too. It's very hard to drive consistency from leader to leader of how you're looking at these things, because there's just so many leaders, there's so many variables, even with reporting. But when you're trying to chase down what drives burnout, the key there is making sure you're focusing on the right thing at the right time, and making sure that the early indicators of that burnout really are the things you want to look at.
And I would add here, Derek, that, to my earlier comment about WFM's responsibility of making sure the agents are efficient and productive, right? We really don't know definitively where that line is, right? We could add something that could push it over the line. We might not be working up to that line. So it's important, and it's always been something we've been concerned with, right? We use surveys, and obviously you can get some information about burnout once somebody's left, but leading up to, we really don't have a good idea of where that is. And just to be frank about it, we want to work very close to, but not over that line. So it's a very important piece of information that we lack today.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance because you're like, okay, I want to call out when someone has been on a call for 30 minutes and the average is 10 minutes, but is this that one time that's going to set them over the edge and cause them to leave? You don't know that. And so are there early warning signs where you can tell that it's been leading up to that ahead of time? So those are the things that you want to be able to see in order to make those indications before making some of those calls. Next slide, please. So how much does attrition cost you? I mean, obviously, I don't think these metrics will be horribly surprising to most of you. It probably is something different for each one of you, depending on what center you sit in and the number of agents that we talked about at the top of the call that Vicki asked of you guys. But Frost and Sullivan did a survey in 2024, and for a 1,000-seat center, on average, about 40% attrition costs a center about $10 million. And centers historically had seen agent attrition surpassing 70%. Obviously, this was in 2024, and those numbers have fluctuated a bit before and after that, depending on what industry you're in or segment of that industry. But that it's costly to your business. On average, they found it's about $35,000 to ultimately replace that agent. By the way, that $35,000 doesn't include the downstream costs it has to employee experience for other employees, as well as also the customer experience. So there's additional costs that goes beyond just backfilling the employee itself when it comes to attrition. The fact of the matter with this number here is that what you have to think about is when you lose an employee, it's not simply about just replacing the employee. Yes, there's a cost to it, and it's a very steep cost to the business, and it adds up very, very quickly. But the thing to also keep in mind is when we're thinking about that tie back to EX and CX, it's also a ripple effect back into your business with those two things, and it adds to that burnout as well. Next slide, please. So when you think about this, I don't think any of this is also going to surprise you guys, myths and facts about burnout and nutrition. Reading through each one of these, I'm not going to read it verbatim because you guys are in workforce management and probably have heard every one of these myths and probably know every one of these facts. But when you hear the myth of someone left because of pay, or they were dissatisfied, or because high turnover is just a norm in that industry, or attrition always happens in the first 90 days. We know that is not true in most cases. Yes, some of those things do factually exist, but the reality is that it's more complex than that. The reality behind it is there's more layers. Pay does matter. But at the end of the day, satisfied employees still leave your business. The main reason people leave a lot of times goes beyond the pay. It goes beyond the benefits. It goes beyond how great the company is a lot of the times. It comes down to, is there career growth opportunities? Does their direct leader support them in the way that they expect to be supported? Do they feel undervalued? And is there ultimately enough opportunity for them to feel like they can grow within that business? And then ultimately getting into the burnout piece of it all, are you as a company supporting their well-being? And that last point, by the way, is becoming increasingly more important with agents as you think about attrition. It's becoming more and more relevant and prevalent in the reason people are leaving, and the reason why people are just staying unemployed too, from what we've seen in some data points. So well-being and things that you're doing to support employee well-being is extremely important in terms of supporting the employee experience when you think about these facts. It's not just these common myths you hear, it's also making sure that you're supporting, at the end of the day, the employee experience. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about the burnout and the attrition, and we've hit on the agent side. And I think it kind of goes without saying, the frontline team, specifically the agents, there's a lot of complex call types that come in that affect them, which leads to just the higher occupancy, all the things that Jim was alluding to at the front of the presentation. And that when we talked about the higher costs, that on average it can get up to 35,000, sometimes on the lower end, as you see here, down to 20,000 for some of our customer base that we've seen. Frost & Sullivan supported that as well. But I also want to hit on the reality, and this isn't true just for management, by the way, this is true for you guys in workforce management. I, as a former workforce management person too, much like Jim, I come from the industry as well, know this to be true as well. When you add complexity to the contact center, it doesn't just impact the agent or eventually that blended worker. It is also going to impact the managers and the operations side, as well as also the support teams like workforce management, learning services, all these teams that are built around them to support that agent. The weight to support those agents is going to just get more and more complex. So it's going to be really, really important in order to support these agents through that complexity. You have the tools available to everyone, whether it's dashboards or reporting or whatever it may be, at the fingertips of these support teams, whether it's workforce management or operations leadership or whoever it may be, that can tell who are the right people to be talking to at the right times. And then also the agents themselves with the appropriate actions and tools to really be focusing on the right things at the right time. But at the end of the day, making sure that you're focusing at the right times and not the wrong times to balance that out, to lighten that load off of these support teams so that you're not tackling everything. So that example I used earlier, where you see that agent that's been on a 30-minute phone call, maybe that's just one bad call they've had and a slew of great calls. So is that the one bad call that we just give them the break on? If something could tell you based on all the factors of where they're at, whether or not that's something that you need to ultimately, based on trend of burnout and stuff, whether or not that's where you need to put your focus based on trending. Next slide, please. So a lot of this data, the good news is exists in the data you're already providing Intradiem if you're a customer of ours, or in the data you already have today. It's actually hidden in your ACD data that you're looking at on a daily basis from a workforce management perspective. It's crazy to think in the 20 years I've been working in workforce management, or on the other side, as they say, the dark side of a vendor, and being here at workforce management at Intradiem for the last 10 years, looking at this data and not realizing it would have been so easy if tools like machine learning and AI had existed. I could have gotten to this data so much faster. But the reality is that these data points exist, and if you could get to them so much quicker to be able to say, this is the things you should be looking at, and it's subtly there, whether it's the ACD, the ACW trend that you've seen over a span of time, and that's gradually going up, and they've historically been a higher performer, but for whatever reason, it's starting to go up with that person. Or adherence is going in the wrong direction for someone that's historically been right. Or you've seen absenteeism change with someone that typically isn't someone that has an absenteeism problem. or their ESAT trend in whatever tool you use to track ESAT. We at Intradiem use 15.5, so we track that. The point is you have all these factors that tell you that this is where your data lies, and it based on trending, it's going in one direction or another. And over a period of time, you're subtly seeing a change. And the idea here is based on that subtle change, it's going to start to tell you where you need to focus. Not immediately because all of a sudden they had a bad day, but over time, you now need to take action. But when it's the right time, you take action based on workforce management or your operational partners versus a tool like potentially Intradiem coming in and taking action before you need to.
And I would say, just a real quick example on that last slide that I think everybody, in the audience can uh, uh, relate to is historically, I can tell you in our old business, and I've talked to a lot of folks who've experienced this, when call volume got really high, and after a day or two, maybe even up to a week, where it just was sort of relentless, whether it was seasonal or what have you, we would see handle time go up. And when we would dig into handle time, we would see inherently that it was ACW, right? So what we determined was agents were just starting to get burned out, right? And they were leveraging ACW. And I use that example with this slide because it's something we've all experienced, but certainly at the time, that was our only data point. And we knew it was out there, but we had difficulty ever correlating it into action. So if you've ever experienced that in your contact center, think about these next few slides in that context and expanding beyond just that one data point in that one enterprise situation.
Yeah, and in that example too, if you know it's a trend across everyone, does it start to stack up with specific individuals where it's more common? Because I think the reality is we know how our ACD systems work. There's a flaw to them, right? Most of the time, your high performing agents tend to get the most calls because of how it prioritizes calls coming in. Does that come at a cost at some point? Because they're more readily available. And does that lead to burnout too? So a tool like this starts to allow you to look at that as well. And that's something some of our customers that have started to look at these factors have started to think about that ties back to this too, because there is that piece of it that you think about that as well. There's the flip side of it too, that creates the burnout in those situations that
Oh,
Jim was
absolutely.
mentioning. All right, so leading into the product itself, the burnout indicator solution that Intradiem has that uses all these early warning signs that I was alluding to. So if you're an existing customer, we already have access to this data. But if you're a newer customer coming into Intradiem and we get access to your ACD system, ultimately through those data points that we with early warning signs that we were just alluding to on the previous slide, we're able to then take those input features. Some of those examples are listed below on here on the slide. These are just examples. Obviously, as we work back with our customer base, we can customize to a certain degree what this list looks like based on what inputs you're providing us. But we ultimately work with you and we customize these risk categories. So we customize them to say, okay, once a agent reaches these specific thresholds based on these specific things, they're going to fall into a low risk. And then once they exceed that threshold, now they're going to move into medium risk, and then so on and so forth. The idea is as they move from low risk to medium or to moderate risk to high risk to critical risk, you're going to see correlating actions that'll happen with the actual product itself. But the idea here is, before we get into the actions piece, is there's a dashboard that supports the operations leaders and even workforce management teams that sits in our product that allows you to see the workers or the agents of where they fall within each of these. So you can see at any given time that Jim as an agent is sitting right now in a low risk category, but then tomorrow when he comes in, because of what happened today, he's moved over into moderate risk category because of what had happened today. So you can see that movement as it's happening and really kind of start to kind of analyze, do I, as Jim's leader, need to be taking any sort of action if I'm choosing to involve myself early myself, or allow, based on how I've partnered with Intradiem to customize the solution and the actions that I'm using the solution for, allow Intradiem to intervene before I need to intervene, which leads us into the actions part of the solution, which is on the next slide. So as you can see here on the next slide, we have some remedial actions that you can then take. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as you can see here, as users fall into each one of these risk categories, you can customize what happens at what point. And the list off to the left is the actions that we tend to recommend out of the gates. But again, there's some customization here that you can do in partnership with Intradiem. But the idea ultimately is that once they're in a low risk category, you can say, I just want to monitor. But then once they move into a moderate high risk category, you choose to take an additional step of coaching them or training them or just giving them simply a surprise break or recognizing them for the hard work. Maybe it was a bad day yesterday for Jim, and you just want to say, great job, Jim, yesterday, getting through a difficult day, and just simply saying that to him. And then that recognition could potentially move him or motivate him for today to do better. And then he moves out of that moderate risk back into a low risk the next day. And then, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Derek.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I can tell you as a WFM person, definitively folks in that certainly high and critical risk are less productive, and then impacts me directly in what I do, right? So I think this information as a WFM professional is critical, right? If all of a sudden I see that number growing and I'm scratching my head, why am I not getting the throughput? This is information I can use and play back to my senior leadership team.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, this is where you as a company get to decide, when does workforce management and or the operational leader get involved. You can see coaching is right here in the moderate high risk, but you can choose, do they get involved at the high risk but not the moderate risk? Do you do some of these actions at the moderate risk? So again, this is highly customizable. This is, as we Intradiem work with our customers, we help decide with them what is appropriate for your business and where you need to get involved. The idea here is not getting you as operation leadership and workforce management involved too early, because if you do that, it has the unintended consequences, as I was alluding to earlier, of burnouts. If you are constantly, that 30-minute example I used earlier, if you're unintentionally chasing after those one-offs in those situations of bad days, and especially as things get more complex, it will lead to burnout unintentionally. So you've got to really drive that very fine balance between a EX and CX balance that you're going to have to strike as we get into this more complex world. On the last slide, and this will just take a couple seconds, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So this is an example of a customer that has implemented our burnout indicator solution. They actually were able to implement it, and they saw a 7 percentage point improvement after they implemented it. This was over just a period of time, so keep that in mind. This isn't over the life of the product. They've had it implemented for some time now, but over this period of time that they had it live, They captured 121 instances of where the tool had found opportunities for for burnouts, and there was 10 critical opportunities and 45 high-risk cases that required some level of intervention, and that's where actions took place. So 55 instances of critical or high-risk actions actually came out of the solution that would have had to be done previously by a supervisor in their environment. That's what they called them, a supervisor. Um, and then 121 instances that the tool identified for them that they would have had to manually identify themselves. How they approached this in this case is they used one-on-one meetings, schedule adjustments, wellness breaks, and additional training and coaching to really just kind of take action to get ahead of these things, to get to that 7-point improvement that they did. Their focus really, and what was really surprising that came out of this, is they really got enhanced agent well-being. This came through in all the positive feedback that came out of the groups that participated in this. They had really great feedback out of the focus groups that provided feedback out of this. But the thing they were most surprised by, we weren't necessarily surprised at Intradiem because we firmly believe in that connection between EX and CX, but they were very surprised by was the improvement they saw with CSAT. Alrighty, on the last slide here, we wanted to give you guys just an opportunity to be able to download the savings calculator associated with attrition. You guys as workforce management people, if you're anything like me and Jim, you're going to get a kick out of this because we love numbers. So if you just simply take this QR code, you're going to be able to plug in your attrition data and then identify what that cost is to you, to be able to put a number behind it to say, okay, this is why this problem is really important for us to go solve. So I know we had a couple questions that came into the chat, and I think, Jim, you were starting to respond to a few.
I did, and I can speak to it. The question was, how do you manage those sort of surprise and wellness breaks? As you know, it might tend to occur when it's least optimal for. And my response was, and we did this at my former employer. I would say, in terms of the wellness breaks, like I mentioned earlier, if agents were having bad calls and they needed that break, it was just that really long, difficult call, they would take it anyway. They would just go into unaccounted ops, use it or after call work or something along those lines. So proactively providing that. And the way we set it up was we asked the agent, do you want this break? And we were surprised to see, I think it was roughly 75 to 80% of the time they took it then, but 20 to 25% they said, I'm good, I'm fine. So they were self-governing in that regard. But the goodwill we got from offering that up, surveys on that particular break were huge. And then we added 1 5-minute break per month. It was a surprise. We just gave it to you. We set it up so it was implemented when we had availability, so we weren't queuing necessarily. And that was a huge win. It was 5 minutes a month and per agent. And it was a really big win. So it's those type of things that make a big difference to the agent population. And like I said earlier, at some point, they're really trying to manage that on their own. So if we work with them to facilitate that, I feel like you get much more goodwill out of it.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's about positive reinforcement. So what we've seen as kind of the net win that you get by doing that too is with other solutions that Intradiem offers, like the handle time alerts or the adherence notifications and things like that. When you're doing things like this, they tend to respond better and adopt better to the other things that drive the efficiencies you're also looking for, that are intended to be assistant tools, but also can sometimes read as that the efficiency side. So it helps kind of agents understand that it's not just about the efficiency, but because you're doing these things around wellness and surprise and all these things, that there is this engagement piece that goes with it. And it reinforces that this isn't just about Big Brother, if you will, but it's about helping them. And this is strictly that example of wellness and surprise breaks. There's nothing in it for quote unquote for us. It's strictly in it for them. Any other questions? I know we're right at time. You can put them here in the chat if you have them for Jim and I.
A great bunch of information here. All I can say, Derek, is it looks like there's probably a great, I would say 2 or 3 great tips of the week in here that you need to write up. The two of you and get us some tips of the week out here.
You're right.
So much great information shared.
I would not disagree, Derek.
I would agree, Vicki.
That and get Vicki a couple over.
Yeah, we'll work on that for you, Vicki.
Right. And Paul does say that in his experience, self-governing, some control of your own time is a game changer. And I think that's true too.
Completely agree.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming through. Guys, thanks so much. Wow, just a lot to think about from here. And loved all the specific information that you shared about attrition and steps to take to keep from there being attrition. So we appreciate it, and I will be looking for those tips of the week soon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.